Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Just fine. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're waiting for Brenda and Councillor Ainsley.
And then Carrie will.
Oh, and Carrie's coming back in. Yeah.
There's Carrie.
Hi again, Carrie.
No, it's still not working, Carrie.
I may need to leave at 11 a.m. because I have to be at work by 12. I have a volunteer program that I run. And so I will need to check out around 11 a.m.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No, can't hear you, Carrie.
One other option, Carrie, is you could if you could use your phone. It really doesn't work.
You can use your phone and stay on the video as well, if you can.
Right, you could just, that's right, Paula, you could just dial in on voice only on your phone and just stay on the video. I think that might work. It's a good idea, Paula.
Okay, well, I think we should get underway. Good morning and welcome to the virtual fourth meeting of the Board of Directors of the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, which is being live streamed for the first time. As a result, I'm pleased to welcome our virtual audience and thank you for joining us. As a City of Toronto Corporation, the Board of Directors acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The board also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Since our last meeting, all directors have been actively involved in the work groups we have established on the General Counsel recruitment, CEO search, and governance. I'd like to thank all of you for the time you've contributed to these meetings and look forward to the discussion of these matters during our meeting today. I'm pleased to inform you that the TSHC Board of Directors has approved the joint transition plan leading to transfer of the operations of the seniors housing portfolio to the Seniors Housing Corporation on June 1st, 2022. This joint board approval is an important first step along our transition path. We will now be developing joint principles to guide the transition planning process and draft terms of reference for a joint board committee that will come to our board in November and the TSHC board in early December. In the meantime, today you will be hearing from Michael and each member of his team about early activities and plans in the transition planning process. These presentations will not require decisions, but are an important opportunity to understand what we can look forward to in the months ahead. Finally, we've received 2 requests for deputations in relation to agenda item 15, the Transition Communications Plan. While our meeting is being live streamed today, the deputants will still be joining us by phone and will not be on the screen. As you know, they'll be invited to speak to the board for a maximum of 5 minutes. And while directors have the opportunity to ask questions, I would ask you to be brief and focus only on matters for clarification. And with that, may I now have a motion for approval of the agenda? Linda?
I so move, Madam Chair.
Okay, Warren moved and Linda seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. So the next item, item 3, is the approval of the minutes of our meeting of September 28th that were previously circulated. Could I have the resolution, Monique? So are there any errors or omissions? And if not, may I have a motion to adopt the minutes?
I so move.
Jim, second. Can I have somebody second them, please? Linda, thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Let me just check at this point to see whether Carrie, can you hear us, Carrie? No, I don't think she's still able to join in. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank
So-
you. Morning.
So I'll move to item 4, the conflict of interest poll. Is there any conflict? Does anyone wish to declare a conflict of interest related to any item on the agenda today? Hearing none, we'll move into closed session to consider a matter containing personnel matters about an identifiable individual. So could I have a motion to move into closed session? Who would like to move that?
I so move, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Warren. Seconder.
I'll second it, Brenda Pears.
Thank you, Brenda. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. So we're moving into closed session. Motion again. So may I have a motion to approve the resolution to pause on the recruitment of a general counsel and corporate secretary until after the CEO recruitment is complete? Who would like to move that?
I move that.
Thank
Madam
you,
Chair.
Warren. Thank you, Warren. Seconder?
Second by Brenda.
Thank you, Brenda. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. That takes us to item 11, the transitional leads report. Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and thank you to the board for all of the work that's gone on since the last board meeting, and really appreciate all of the involvement in the work that's underway. Since the approval of the transition plan at our board meeting in September, the work has been moving ahead very quickly, and overall, I'm very pleased with the progress that we are making, both as a corporation ourselves, but in collaboration with Toronto Community Housing and the city. And I just want to start by thanking both the teams at Toronto Community Housing and at the city. The work has been extremely collaborative in nature. The teams at both Toronto Community Housing and the city have been absolutely terrific in helping our small team get all the information that we need, and so that we can be effective in moving the work ahead from our side of the table. And the goal that I sense from the leadership at Toronto Community Housing, the city, and ourselves is very much aligned, which is, of course, a seamless transition for tenants and staff June 1st next year, so that we can be established as a corporation on a strong footing to start the work of focusing on the needs of seniors tenants in the city of Toronto. So very pleased with how the work is going, both in the content of the work, but also in the spirit in which it's being undertaken. You'll see today many of the items that we wanted to bring today are really updates on each of the key pieces of work from our transition team. We view this as a very important step in being able to receive feedback from the board on that work. So we'll identify the key highlights of progress, but also any risk issues, and we'll really appreciate your feedback and guidance as we go forward. Many of the items that are on today's agenda will come back regularly at the board and at appropriate times for approval where that's necessary to move ahead, and there will be parallel sessions, of course, at the Toronto Community Housing Board with their approvals at the key milestones for each of the pieces of work. So I think I will leave it at that. You'll see much of the content in the items that come ahead, and I'm very excited that our transition team, now fully in place, will have an opportunity to present on their work, and for you to get to know them, and also for you to be able to provide feedback as we go forward. So I'll leave it at that, Maureen, and happy to answer any specific questions.
Thanks very much, Michael. Are there any questions for Michael? No? Okay, thanks very much, Michael. And we really are most fortunate to both have the team all in place and have the reports coming from them today. So thank you for making that happen. Item 12, the approval of the Board of Directors Standing Committee structure. So this is the opportunity to hear what is being proposed, and Lawrence will take us through the report. Lawrence?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The governance work group is recommending a structure of 3 standing committees of the board. The first one is a Corporate Governance and Human Resources Committee. Second one, Audit, Finance and Risk Management Committee. And the third one is a Quality and Tenant Engagement Committee. Our work group is also proposing high-level responsibilities and membership for each committee. The group is also recommending a board standing committee principles that define relationship between the board and the board standing committees, mandate of each board standing committee, and membership and term. I mean, these principles will be included as a policy in the proposed board policy. Yeah, I think the rest of those high-level responsibilities are in the document that has been circulated to you. If you've got any comments or questions, please go ahead.
I just have a question.
Lawrence, Paula?
Yeah, I just wondered if Lawrence, if you were able to take advantage of the Tenants First team at the city that in this conversation as far as the board committees and expectations, particularly around the Tenant Services Committee.
Yeah, not at this stage, Councillor. You know, while developing the detailed terms of reference for each committee, I will talk to, I mean, you had mentioned a couple of names. I will talk to them.
And maybe it's worth just reminding the board that following the approval of the proposed structure today, the next step will be the both preparation of draft terms of reference for each committee and also canvassing all of the directors for preferences as to committee assignments, both of which will come back in November. So Lawrence will have the opportunity to do more consultation between now and then, subject to the overall approval.
Yes, I'll just speak about that if there's no questions, Maureen.
Well, let me see if there are any more questions first. Any other questions for Lawrence? No? Okay, yes, Paula?
Thank you, and Lawrence, thank you for this. I was happy to work on that committee with you to come up with this structure. I am just going to encourage that the tenants first team is still in place at the city, and the shareholders very interested in anything to do with tenants in this new seniors unit. Jen St. Louis on the phone here. She heads that team up. It's under the deputy city manager. And that team has spent thousands of hours getting this corporation to this place. And I wouldn't want to see us not have that very deep consultation there to make sure we're meeting those expectations of the incredible work that that team has done. As you know, the Seniors Corporation was the baby of the former deputy city manager. So Paul, you've now adopted that, but Juliana Carbone, this was her personal project to make sure that seniors had a good life, Toronto Community Housing. It was even considered to be a city division, but with the structure of the land ownership and TSHC, that couldn't happen. So I think it's a very strong alignment to the city, and it would be great if at every step we could do that. And I'm happy to see that we look like we're in that direction. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Paul. Any other comments or questions before we have the motion?
I'm happy to move the motion, Maureen.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Lawrence, would you like to second it?
No, he should move it, or he should move it and I'll second it, Maureen. It's his report. Absolutely,
All right,
sorry.
I'll have Lawrence move it, and if you will, Lawrence. And
Yeah, okay, I'll move it.
and Paula second.
For
Thank you.
sure. Sorry about that, Lawrence.
It was a
Thank you.
team effort. So, any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. This is a very important step because it really now gives us the framework to start doing more detailed work related to our mandate as a board within the various components. And so I'm really pleased that we've come this far, and we will actually be getting them operational after our next board meeting. So stay tuned for the next stage in the process. Thank you. So let me just update you verbally on the CEO search process. Excuse me. We have circulated the request for proposal. First of all, the search committee has reviewed and provided input to Michael and Helena on the request for proposals before it went out last week. It was sent on an invitational basis. It was a very, very detailed, comprehensive request for proposal that was sent on an invitational basis to 3 firms. They had the opportunity to ask for clarification, and we asked them to confirm their intent to submit a proposal. And I'm pleased to say that all 3 firms have indicated that they will be submitting a proposal, and the proposals are due this Friday. We have scheduled interviews with each of the 3 firms for a week Friday, the 5th of November, and by the members of the search committee. And in the meantime, the search committee members will be reviewing and confirming the interview process and questions. And excuse me, and then the following Monday, the search committee will reconvene to review our rankings of the firms and make a decision as to the preferred candidate. So we're right on track. We're very pleased that we've had the interest from 3 firms that have deep experience in this area. And so that's really just to update you on where we're at. But I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. Yes, Paula? You're on mute.
I have questions. I don't know if I'll have to go in camera to discuss this or not, but the roster that you used, where did that come from? Your 3?
Ask Michael to speak to that.
Yes, happy to Paula and Maureen. We are on the basis of going forward with an invitational, I, along with others, Maureen and with Helena, looked at the firms that we felt would have most experience and be the most suitable for this assignment, and that's how we came up with the roster. And Helena's online and can speak to any specifics about what we felt were the requirements, but experience obviously in the public sector at this level, and with city corporations included. That's how we came up with the roster.
Did you look in particular for those who have experience in recruiting for the municipal relationships, or was it?
That was included as part of the kind of characteristics that we would like to see.
And who oversaw the procurement?
We did. Well, we're in the process of the procurement right now, but we've established based on an invitational process and what we think is a rigorous approach to interview of those candidates, and then ranking those candidates. That will happen after the interview process, of course, based on their proposal, their interview, and the price. And we'll come up with a preferred candidate that the selection committee, which is the selection committee of the board, will need to approve to actually land that candidate firm. So the selection committee essentially is overseeing the procurement.
Okay.
Any other questions at this stage? And as I said, this is really just to keep you apprised, and we will be hopefully bringing you, well, we will be making a selection on the 8th of November and then be able to report to you on the at our next board meeting. And in the meantime, work will be underway.
I'm just not sure this shouldn't have been an in-camera discussion, Maureen, because we can't really ask a lot of questions here. Because
well, we
it's
didn't put it in camera because I think we didn't think it was in camera because it was simply updating you, and we aren't talking about any specific firms, simply indicating what the process has been.
Yes, but I can't hear who the firms are because
No.
because we're in public. So I'm not sure where you got that advice that this was a public conversation.
Okay, are you saying that you, sorry, Michael, can you?
Yeah, I was just going to say we thought at the outset this would be a public item based on the information that we thought would be sufficient. But I think, Councillor Fletcher, if you'd like to discuss who were the invitees, we would need to go in camera.
Yeah, I've not seen a CEO update in public in any other corporation. So usually it's I've not seen a CEO. Anyway, I'm just asking. The CEO updates on the selection usually are an in-camera item in case there's any kinds of questions of any kind, because it's very sensitive. Yeah.
Well, unless we will certainly do that next time. And unless there are any further questions, if you want us to go in camera, we will. Otherwise, we'll do so next time.
No, I would like to. I'd like to know your process on the selection, why you chose certain firms. That's all.
So you would like to go into camera
That's
today?
correct. Yeah.
Okay, then
You'll just need you'll just need a vote, Maureen,
Yes,
to go into camera, because we didn't put this as a closed item, and our closed session policy requires if there's an item that comes up during the meeting that a board member wishes to take into closed session, we need a vote to proceed.
Yes, of course, we have to go. There has to be a motion, and perhaps in the future these should be in closed session. I just suggest that.
I'll move the motion, Madam Chair.
thanks, Warren. Would you like to second that, Paula?
Sure, thank you.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed?
And then Rajni, if you could just pause the live stream while we go into closed session, please, and just let us know when that's done.
I'll do that right now.
Financial planning with Norman. So
Yes,
would you
so
like
we'll
to
just
introduce him?
Yes, as we go back into,
When we go,
when
yeah,
we're back in public
thank you.
session, I'll do that. Yes.
Thank you very much. Rajni?
I'm sure Rajni's probably letting people.
You're live now. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we have now item number 14, the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, TCHC 2022 financial planning. Michael, can I turn it over to you to introduce Norman? And
Yes, Rajni, I'm sure you're just letting people know to come back now that we're in public session. That would be great, please.
Yes, they will be back now.
Yeah.
I've sent them a note.
Thank you. While we're waiting, I will introduce Norman Reese, who's our interim financial lead and has been working closely with the Toronto Community Housing team and the city team to start to develop the financial picture for Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, both before transition and after transition. And you'll know we've got a budget that has been up until the end of December. Norm is managing that, of course, but also working with the city and Toronto Community Housing to determine the budget that we will require between January and June, which is the transition date. And then, of course, our operating budget after June 1st, which is the transition date. So I think Norm's back, and I'll hand it over to you, Norm, for your report.
Thank you. Good morning. Nice to meet you all virtually for the first time, except for Warren, of course, which I've known for since we were much younger. So you have a report in front of you that has essentially three components to it. Our financial results through September, and then a little bit of a discussion on where we stood at the time with respect to the 2022 budget. So I will defer unless there's questions on the where we stand to date. It's fairly straightforward. I think the only new news is that we actually received a little bit more from the city than was originally budgeted, and I think that was the sort of a 10% contingency that the city provided. I think the main issue for conversation really is the 22 budget. And for purposes of conversation, I've really divided it into two pieces. One is the transition budget, and the second is what I've called the incremental budget. And the transition budget is that budget from January to the end of May, and assuming that we have a June 1st operational date. And then the second piece is the incremental budget on a go-forward basis. We have been working with the city with respect to the transition budget, and this is sort of the state of the nation as it was a few weeks ago, and we are continuing to refine this number upwards at the moment as we understand a little bit more about our staffing requirements. As we understand a little bit more about our staffing requirements, and also beginning to give consideration to whether we should be recruiting some non-executive leadership team positions before June 1. And so that we're in the midst of doing that right now, and we should land on a number in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll be able to share that with all the parties concerned. Couple of items that we were able to, one item in particular we were able to take off the table, which is noted below the little chart that's on page 24, is that we weren't certain at the time what the cost for the IT implementation would be, or the cutover between ourselves and Toronto Community Housing. And indeed, that's off the table on our side, because Toronto Community Housing has included the cost of partitioning all those systems, meaning the segregation of Toronto Community Housing transactional activity from Toronto Seniors Housing activity, and they've put that into their budget submission to the city as a pressure. It's not actually in their budget that the city has, but it's in as a pressure, as part of their pressures to support us on a go-forward basis. So I would say right now that we are within a couple of weeks of getting finalizing what we believe to be the transition budget for next year. And I've been working with Jen St. Louis and others on that matter. With respect to the incremental budget, or that budget that starts June 1, I think I could safely say that right now we're sort of in the midst of seeking clarity on how we and the city will deal with the potential in-year pressures on a go-forward basis. The city has provided some incremental dollars for next year, but we'll be greatly informed by the shared services work that we will be doing with the Toronto Community Housing. And so I guess we're in a bit of state of play right now, I guess is the best way of saying it, with respect to the amount of any incremental costs that may come forward from the standing up of this corporation, and how the city may deal with that, either as a in-year pressure or upfront, and that's still to be decided. And I think that that's the key challenge for us and for the board, is trying to get a handle on how that will look, and how the new organization will be financed effective June 1. So we're still in the midst of sorting that out. In the meantime, what our organization is doing is trying to understand, if we were a standalone organization, what were some of the key things that we're going to need, apart from executive leadership team and a board. I mean, there's a whole.
Are other people having computer
Yeah,
problems?
Yeah, we've lost. There, it's back. You're back, Norm. We just lost the last sentence, Norm.
Oh, so we, I would say in the next, we'll have greater clarity by the next board meeting as to how we want to proceed with this. And I think the city's facing enormous pressure, so we need to, be clear about our requirements on a go-forward basis. The final thing that I'd like to just show is, and it's very microscopic, it's on attachment 4, and it was a very early picture of the segregation or the splitting of revenue and costs between Toronto Community Housing and Toronto Seniors Housing. And it was largely based on a unit split, with the exception of specific direct costs like natural gas, taxes, and the seniors housing unit. So it's an indication of what it might look like as a first cut. And of course, as we work through the shared services agreement with the Toronto Community Housing, that'll become much clearer. But as an entity, sort of as in very broad brush strokes, this entity, when it's up and running on an annualized basis, will have revenue and costs to support seniors housing in the order of $120 to $130-ish million. And you can see the revenue and the costs that are allocated. So it's an indicator. That's all it is at this point in time. So to summarize, I think we're in a good financial place right now. We're very close to understanding what our final costs will be through transition. And I think the key challenge and risk for us is to figure out with the city how to identify what potential incremental costs this organization may incur over and above the splitting of costs from Toronto Community Housing. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Norm. During the course of your presentation, I've lost all but 3 people on the screen, so I'm not sure what the problem
Brenda had
is.
a question, Maureen.
Sorry?
Brenda had a question.
Okay, thank you. So I guess what I'd ask is, I can't see your hand, so if you would please just raise your voice if you have a question. Brenda?
Thank you. Just 2 quick ones. Do we have office expenses? By that I mean rent. Have we decided on location or anything like that? And is it reflected yet in these documents in front of us?
There is a location being considered right now as a corporate office on Yonge Street. The address is 400 and something. It's opposite the Toronto, the old Toronto College Street, Yonge and College. And my understanding is that there will not be a rental charge because it's within one of the facilities that we will be managing. There may be some fit-up costs associated with it, you know, partitioning and computers and such, but no ongoing office rent.
And my second question is just, what is I see here in revenue, you have City of Toronto grant, but presumably we get revenue from the rent as well? Is that?
Correct. So there's rent geared to income, and that's the majority of our rental income. And then there's a city subsidy, and that's the a calculation based on rent geared to income over a period of time, and that amount this past year was like $250 million to Toronto Community Housing, and I think under this split we'd see 30 or 40 million of that.
Okay, so I don't see rent as a source of revenue in any of these charts. It just says City of Toronto grant. I just wanted to know what percentage of our revenue comes from rent.
On the cash flow, it indicates, it says residential rent, RGI, rent geared to income, residential rent market.
Sorry, Norm, can you just clarify? Norm, can you just indicate what page chart you're on?
This was my attachment 4.
Attachment 4, okay.
Which is a spreadsheet provided by the city or Toronto Community Housing. And
okay, because it's a little unreadable for me with my sight. Sorry.
So of the roughly $120 million. That's on here. That's seniors. Approximately 75 million of that is rent from tenants. 75 million. So about 63% is rent from tenants. There's another 40 million, so that's about another 30% for subsidies, and then there's a series of commercial rent and parking and so on for the rest. So about roughly could say about 60% tenant rent, 30% subsidy, and 10% everything else, sort of at a rough cut.
And that's based on the Toronto Community Housing. Or
this is based upon the allocation
for seniors.
The Toronto Community Housing did as a proxy.
Okay.
When we finally arrive at the rental income plan and subsidy, that will be based by development, by building, by unit, by size of unit, and then the subsidy will be calculated, I gather, in concert with the 3 parties, but this year probably between the city and Toronto Community Housing, and then will be the recipient of that information. But the city does, at the end of the day, do that calculation, particularly for the subsidy.
So that attachment 4 is the allocation for seniors out of the Toronto Community Housing.
Correct.
So all
As a-
those numbers there.
As a proxy, right? So
Okay,
the total,
that's
the total revenue for Toronto Community Housing last year was a little over 600 million,
Hmm.
and spent a little less than 600 million as well. And of that total, we're about 20%.
Okay, and it's possible, sorry to bother you about this, but is it possible to have this resent in bigger?
I'm sure that could be done.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And just for the benefit of other board members, if you're, I just note that Norm's spreadsheet is attachment 4,
Yeah.
but it's actually listed after item 14, attachment 6. So it may be a bit confusing, but it is the spreadsheet. And Norm, you'll have that increased in font size or.
Yeah, we'll arrange for that to be sent out.
Thank you very much. I'm
Thank you
trying.
very much.
I'm trying, as you
Okay.
can see with my microscope.
I understand.
So, thanks, Brenda. Are there any other questions for Norm?
I just have a question, please, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Just going through those numbers, you said 6% is from parking and leases. Those are for those 83 buildings. Norm, confirming that, right?
So the 6 million for parking, laundry, cable fees, and commercial rent adds up to about 9 million, and that relates strictly to seniors housing. The
The
total,
83 buildings.
correct,
Correct.
correct. Of the total that was received by Toronto Community Housing last year of around 19 million.
So that's a fair chunk of that, isn't it? 9 million of 19 million and only 83 buildings. Do I have that wrong?
No, that's the as I say, that is the allocation of the revenue. Sorry, I apologize. The parking, laundry, cable revenue last year for Toronto Community Housing was 36 million. The commercial rent was 16 million. So that
Okay.
is 51 million. And of that 51 million, Toronto seniors was around 9.
9. So that's still in the 20% range, or is it higher? You're good at math.
That's more or less. Yep, more or
Okay.
less.
And is there any impact that we need to think about on the commercial renters? I know there's been the rent freeze, I think, everywhere on commercial rent. Is that going to have an impact on income? Do we have any sense of that yet?
My understand, I was fortunate enough to sit in with the city and the Toronto Community Housing preliminary budget. So I gather there are some assumptions of declined rent recovery for a variety of reasons that Toronto Community Housing has put forward to the city. So these numbers that you're looking at here are the actual results from last year.
2020.
2020.
Okay. And then the other question that I think is of interest is the degree of RGI units in the 83 buildings, the seniors portfolio versus the Toronto Community Housing portfolio, because it's far more heavily subsidized, I think.
It may well be, and that, again, that allocation of costing and revenue will be identified when we do the final budget between the two organizations. So again, this is a proxy for what it will look like. My understanding as well is that the city had directed Toronto Community Housing to move more units to rent geared income. So that's another pressure that this system will be seeing next year.
I think the seniors unit's at about 98% RGI, and the other family portfolio is at somewhere, I think, 85 or less. So there's quite a big delta there. I don't know if how that's going to impact any of the revenues, or if it would or not.
Yeah, I don't know. So
Significantly different.
when we get to that point of looking at the revenue split and between for the 22 budget with Toronto Community Housing, that will be on a unit by unit, building by building, property by property basis.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your work. Money's always so important to know where it is. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Norm? Okay, Norm, thank you very much. This is a very helpful baseline for us, and we'll look forward to the progress of your negotiations and discussions, and thank you for continuing your work on this.
You're welcome.
Our next item is item 15, the Transition Communications Plan. As I mentioned at the outset, we have two deputations. The first is Bill Lohman from the Saranac Apartments. Rajni, is Mr. Lohman on the line?
I am.
Yes, I'll patch him in. Bill Lohman on the line. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Lohman. I'm Maureen Quigley. I'm the chair of the board and joined by all my colleagues. And we appreciate your time in coming to speak to us today. So please go ahead. And as you know, you have 5 minutes and then there may be some questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Sherrar, and members of the senior board. My name is Bill Lohman. I'm a senior living in one of the 83 buildings. I represent my community. I'm a member of the Senior Tenants Advisory Committee, and I am a longstanding member of Seniors Voice. And I want to thank the board for recognizing the need for seniors to be acknowledged and making it possible for us to be heard. It is gratifying to hear comments in past meetings by board members that are consistent with the original intent of Tenant's first proposal to council and not what it has morphed into. It is extremely important for you to know that up to this point, senior tenants have been provided little insight and almost no input on any aspect of the integrated service model, nor given any voice or influence to any matter related to this transition. There is no stated provision in the model for tenants' influence and redress. So we have little voice and no say. Even the STAC, which was created to give seniors a voice and input on advising and implementing the integrated service model, has been little more than a rubber stamp. We focused on logos, imaging, suggestions for the newsletter, and some brainstorming breakout sessions to detail the integrated service model. But when questions were raised about tenant engagement, tenant input, and staff accountability, things changed. STAC members received a stern letter stating that this is what you will talk about and only this. Concerns brought forward by seniors have been totally ignored. Without the benefit of clarity of purpose, how can thoughtful, honest advice be proffered? The original vision of Tenants First for the standalone seniors entity and promised in the community presentations by the seniors manager was a lot more considerate and appealing to senior tenants than this one-sided slipstream application of self-serving protocols that focus on corporate strategic priorities instead of the actual needs and wellness of aging seniors. How can you promise seniors a trip to the moon, then hand them a bag of dirt, and then say, sorry, the trip was changed, you'll just have to be happy with some of this moon dust? Communication for us is a little more complicated than a poster campaign and a talk at you strategy. It's a two-way street. It's about creating and sharing ideas, information, facts among people to reach a common understanding. Communication is the act of giving, receiving, and sharing information. And that not only helps to facilitate the process of passing the information and knowledge to others, it helps people develop positive relationships. Trust is a critical element in effective communications. Just visualize a manager that has the ability to always say the right things in the right way, but is not trusted, compared with a manager who is highly trusted, but either can't or doesn't communicate well. Which manager influences opinions of others the most? Communications ability or trust? Trust is the leverage to communicate well or to be ignored. Ask yourself these questions. Do they trust me? Is there something I am promising that might cause them to lose my trust, or trust in me? And it was stated recently by Joanne Smale, this is an opportunity to shape input on communication plans for informing tenants about the new Toronto Senior Housing Corporation, and that we need clear, concise, and consistent communication. I can't tell you how many times that statement has been uttered by willing seniors over the past few years. This board needs to assert its power and demand senior tenant participation and input on all these working groups and committees that have so far followed the for them but not with them agenda, all without senior tenant input or inclusion. What is in fact unfolding here is gobsmackingly divergent from the plan proposed by Tenants First and introduced to us by senior management. Involved senior advocates have a list of common issues that we are not getting answers to. And if you would like a copy of this list, we would be happy to send it to you. Trust
Mr.
is
Lohman,
the residue of
we've
promises fulfilled. My time's up?
Yes, I'm sorry, it is. So if you'd just like to make a concluding comment, that'd be great.
Oh, thank you. Shortly, yes. Trust is the residue of promises fulfilled. To gain it requires truth-telling and promise-keeping. And that is what we hope to establish with this new corporation, with your help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lohman, and thank you for your thoughtful reflections and your wise advice. Let me ask if there are any questions for Mr. Lohman. Well, thank you very much. And Brenda, sorry, yes. Brenda, can you just identify yourself, please?
Thank you.
Just a second. Mr. Lohman, you're still with us. We have a question for you from Brenda Paris, one of our public members. Brenda?
Thank you, Mr. Lohman. I wasn't quite clear the time element, because you talked about we did this, we did that. Are we talking something recent? Are we talking something in the past? Could you just give me a sense of the time frame? You mentioned we have a list of common issues. Was that something recently compiled or something that had been developed over a year ago?
Well, honestly, Director Paris, it is a list that has evolved by staff members on issues that have been raised in that venue. There was also a long list going back to the start with Tenants First and Toronto Housing Refresh. There have been many questions, and I guess the point here is that none of them have been satisfactorily addressed. And so we are sitting here with no clarity. At this moment, even as staff members, we do not fully understand what the function and the role and the responsibilities of the senior services coordinators are. We do not understand our use of space and how that have been hearing is being turned over to agency, and that we will not have access to it. These things are contrary to the statements by Tenants First and seniors management about tenants having input and involvement, and being involved in directing, the flow of our own wellness. To this point, the integrated service model, all decisions that are being made have no senior input.
Mr.
Thank you
Lohman,
very
and
much.
we appreciate your input very much, and you'll hear, Jim? Jim,
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Lohman, Jim Meeks,
Yeah,
one
I
of our
would just like to make sure that you forward that list to us, please.
We certainly will.
Thank
Absolutely.
you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lohman. Our second deputant is Maureen Clohessy, who was, as you recall, our first deputant at our last meeting. So Maureen, welcome. And again, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for hearing me again today. As Bill did, I'm addressing item 15 on communications. I was going to mention the need to change a few key words in the communications plan, like cascading or touch point pulse checks, until I read through all of the notes and all of the printouts that I have on the transition and the communication. And I saw the bigger picture. The whole thing is cascading. It's all, as far as getting info out, you've done a great plan, but it's all out. It's not a communication plan for getting information in. Both the TSHC and the TCHC have put out what you refer to as high-level work plans for transition. Communication has to come in to move through these work plans. I know you've recently added a consultant to your team and will be forming your own committees. TCHC's joint project map has 19 different steering committees, project working groups, other related working groups, and an executive advisory group. Guess how many of those 19 have tenant or stack input into their ongoing communication and planning? 0. As a tenant and a stack member, I don't expect to be part of the communications around budgets, legal issues, or lease agreements. But I definitely want and expect to be heard in the communications involving things like shared services, engagement, operations, staffing models, ISM development, new services. We need to be included as part of the communication and planning in these committees and working groups and consultant meetings. And that's the big piece of your communication plan that's missing. And that's all I have to say today.
Thank you very much, Maureen. And are there any questions for Maureen Clohessy?
Just a quick comment, Maureen. I just wanted to thank both of the deputants for the clarity of the message. I think it's really helpful as a director that they're actually very in sync and kind of give us a really clear mandate of what we need to actually be focusing in on with the engagement of our senior tenants.
Thank you for that, Linda. Well, thank you both. This is a very important input for us as we begin this process. And I think with that, I would ask Arlene to give us an overview and mindful of what we've heard, give us an overview of the proposed communication plan. And thank you both. And now you'll be able to, since we're live stream, you can hang up and you can be watching the presentation on the screen and listening to the discussion. So thank you both for your very important input. Okay, Arlene.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the board, and to the deputants for their insights that they shared with us this morning. I've had the pleasure of speaking with Ms. Kohesi and Mr. Lohman before, and they're really terrific in framing the issues and making sure we're aware of what we're dealing with moving forward. I just would like to recognize that the work that we've been doing thus far has been very cooperative between Toronto Community Housing and our team, and I really appreciate the efforts there. We've also had the opportunity to listen to the feedback from tenants. In September, we held a meeting with the staff group just to provide a general update on what was happening, excuse me, with the transition. And then in October, actually last week, Monday, we had an opportunity to work with the tenants in a focus group, which Mr. Lohman and Ms. Kohesi both participated in, specifically on communications. So I just wanted to thank them for continuing to raise their voices. You have had an opportunity to look at the materials that we sent out in advance, so I won't belabor all of the content, but what I would like to draw your attention to is that the communications plan is just that. We are focused on communications at this point. The engagement work that is underway within Toronto Community Housing is work that is in progress, both within the ISM structure and within the general tenant engagement stream. And I think it would be prudent from what the work that's in flight and based on one of the guiding principles from the city, which is minimize disruption to tenants and to staff, that we continue on the course of ensuring that these two systems are implemented. And as we move to operationalizing the corporation, that we then take a good hard look at how they're working, because they actually haven't been fully implemented yet, to understand the impact of how they're working. We understand that there are longstanding issues that predate the creation of the corporation that exists between the tenants and Toronto Community Housing. And we're very mindful to keep those into account as we move forward. And I'm developing quite a file of issues coming from various tenants on operational issues, which I think is one of the challenges we will have moving forward, because the operational issues at this point are still within the purview of Toronto Community Housing to deal with. So I wanted to touch down on a couple of those points. Within the plan, we do have, as Ms. Kohesi noted, we have a number of opportunities to send communications out to the field starting next week. We will be sending out information to both staff, to leadership staff, to the public, and to tenants included, with our October campaign, which you would have seen in our communications plan. We want to take the approach that we will provide information out in this first round on the transition, and then our intention is to go back and do pulse checks and get feedback from the tenants on whether the content is what they need, what they want, what do they need us to change. That's the reason the pulse check is in the plan. We also have an opportunity within the plan to hold a information session with the tenants prior to the shared services agreement being put forward to get their input around some of the programming and some of the proposals that are going to be going forward as part of the shared services that would directly affect them. So I think what I'd like to just make sure that I'm clear on with the board is that there are opportunities to both share and to listen. And it is our intention that at every opportunity where we will be presenting, there are a number of opportunities coming up in the November, December timeframe, we are making time to listen to the feedback and respond to that. And we're using the existing channels at TCH because our commitment is to not being disruptive, and those channels are in place and tenants are used to getting information that way. So we will use the channels, but we will use them judiciously, and we will be looking to get their feedback along the way. And we will be continuing to use our focus groups to do that. In the short while that we have been up and running, we have been working on getting our website in progress, getting our identity sorted. And it's a very simple identity, but the purpose of that is to indicate that we're trying to differentiate from Toronto Community Housing, but we are not yet fully working on a branding exercise because I believe that would be the purview of the incoming leaders of the organization. We got some terrific feedback from the focus group where they thought it would be important to have updates shared with them in advance so that we could get their input, and we will try to do that. They suggested that perhaps, when we're doing our communication, that it be more authentic. They didn't want to see things like stock photography or the website being, not accessible to people. We are focusing on actually working on those two things immediately, and we are going to be engaging in getting photography with authentic tenants in their authentic environments. Originally, to get started, we will have to use some stock, but we will quickly move forward on changing that. And we also understand that for the needs of the tenant population, they would require information in various languages. So we've had our website designed so that there's instantaneous translation on the material that sits at the front of our website, and everything that's going to be attached to our website we will try to get those, we will be getting those translated as well. So I trust that gives the board a sense of what we have going forward. We will continue to provide updates quarterly, in terms of making sure that people know what's happening internally and externally. And we will be doing pulse checks along the way with tenants and staff just to see what other needs they need us to fulfill as the transition moves forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Arlene. Maybe before I ask others, just picking up on the comments of our two deputants, based on the input you received from the focus group and other input, is there an opportunity to reflect in your communications the input that you've already received and the mechanisms you're going to look for receiving more input going forward? Because I must say, as I looked at it, I didn't see that piece of it as clearly as I think we might want to see or our deputants would want to see. So can you just comment on that?
Yes, so we are, the deputants are very interested in providing feedback and making sure that communications is two-way. And I think Mr. Lohman was very clear on that, and that is a definite principle. So as I said initially, we are going to send out our first package. We'd like to see how that is received, whether it has enough information to get people started. What do they need more going forward on transition that we could put into the next communication? How do we need to present it so that it's much more accessible and available to the population? I know that there was an ask for us to have more in person, and we will be resuming in person when it's safe to do so. But for the meantime, we will be asking and having these sessions virtually and taking their feedback and incorporating it. Feedback was given to us in our focus group where, for example, they asked us to consider using channels such as community programming, local community programming, because some seniors can't even get out of their apartments. So could we consider doing that moving forward? We are looking into whether that's a possibility, something that we might use closer to when we're ready to go live operationally, because then we can use that with the new CEO and the new team. And so that's an opportunity we're investigating. They've asked for things like, could we put posters up and clean the bulletin boards and make sure the bulletins board are decluttered and the transition information is prominent. And I've had conversations with my colleagues at TCH, and that work is in progress, so that when our updates go out in the next week or so, the bulletin board should be cleaned, and the transition information should be clearly noted, and the transition packages will also be mailed directly to the homes of tenants so that they all have an opportunity to read it, and they will also have the opportunity to request the information to be in one of the top 10 translated languages, which we will have available to them.
Thanks, Arlene. Other questions for Arlene? I have Linda, Carrie, and Brenda. Linda?
I'll be brief. Thanks for that. I think that my one recommendation would be to be really intentional on the strategy around the senior engagement. So it sounds like there's lots of things that are underway, but they're not hearing it in the communication. So, like kind of upfront, for me, all of us are here because of this stakeholder. They're they're the center of the universe, and we need to actually make sure that they feel confident, that they actually know where we're going. And it sounds like there's really good intent there, but just actually being, kind of put that up front, and like even in terms of the communication strategy to us, so that we know that that's actually happening. When you describe it, I can see that there's lots happening, but I think more in actually the actual strategy.
Yeah.
Thanks. Carrie.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, because this is a little odd with the phone. Arlene, first I want to commend you on putting this together as quickly as you have. You didn't hit the ground running, you hit the ground at warp speed. So kudos, for that. As, looking at this through the eyes of tenants and hearing, Maureen and Bill's deputations, everything that I think tenants are going to be seeing in the first couple of presentations will be on the transition. And as a critical tenant, and we certainly have many of those, you might say, oh, terrific, we're going to do all of this work to transition this very ineffective, very inefficient, not good at all communication system from TSHC to the new corporation. And I think it's critical. We have a very short time frame to indicate that it isn't we aren't just advising tenants on the status of the transition of the communication. It is, a much larger piece. I appreciate what you said earlier about, the engagement piece will come. But again, I think our time frame is just very, very short right now to make that point, that it isn't all about communicating transition to the new corporation. There has to be a lot more meat on the bone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Brenda?
One quick question and basically one comment. Can you explain to me the touch point pulse checks with tenants, how that will be done, through what mechanism? What is it?
So yeah, I think that maybe is too fancy a term, Brenda.
Yes, I know. I hate jargon, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So we held a focus group on the 18th, which was a touch point, to understand what they thought of the work that we had actually envisaged in the plan. The plan is rather high level because there's a lot of detail that sits underneath it, and we didn't feel the need to take everybody through all of the detail. But it is
devil's in the details, isn't it?
It is, and it does certainly make for a great deal of conversation. But touch points are basically what I'd like to continue to do is to have these focus groups with any tenants that are interested in giving us feedback on how we're doing, what we're doing, and what we need to improve. And so, these
are focus groups put together by whom?
Oh, it would be put together by the TCH team. Because they have access to the tenants. At this point, they are still the tenants of TCH. Right. So I work with the tenant engagement team at TCH, and they have been very, very, very helpful and very responsive in trying to pull people together for us.
So this is not stack. This is focus groups, based in the building or across the buildings?
The call goes out generally. In our last focus group, I think we had probably 50% staff members, but the call goes out generally, and if anyone wants to participate, they're welcome to participate.
So out of that, I would suggest, Madam Chair, that obviously we need to figure out some way to establish what our form of communication and engagement with tenants will be, which I know will be coming in our deliberations, but it seems to me that's still up in the air. And my comment, following from your answers, thank you very much, is it's kind of a funny chicken and egg thing. I mean, how do we differentiate the Seniors Housing Corporation from the Toronto Community Housing while still recognizing and realizing we are dependent and relevant on, and they are still responsible, of course, to date, without relying on their existing channels of communication, because it seems to me that's what's the missing piece, that the existing channels have been found wanting in various ways for various reasons, which I'm not quite certain yet of. And it seems to me we need to deliberately, specifically address the issue of how we can differentiate ourselves, all the while acknowledging that symbiotic relationship we do have. So my concern with the volume of work, quite admirable that you've done, certainly speaks to corporate communication needs. We are trying to get our message out to stakeholders, but it doesn't yet speak to tenant engagement processes. Okay, and I think that's the missing piece. And whether it's through the committee or whether it's through some of the work that you can start, I think it's important to find some way to differentiate ourselves, our manner, our process of communicating. Because it seems to me people are concerned that they're being told afterhand. They want to be involved beforehand. So, putting together a newsletter and sending it out and then waiting for their response, while admirable, is missing the point of what, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the tenants are saying is, we're not involved in that beforehand process. So I'd like to highlight that and find some way to put some urgency to the need to that distinguishment, that uniqueness, all the while recognizing our symbiotic relationship. But it seems to me we need, and we're already making steps, but we need to make steps that direct us more in that future orientation of how we want to engage with tenants differently. And I know this is not all your responsibility, but it's certainly part of your responsibility. And I'd just like to highlight the need to start, even in our early steps, making sure we make that distinguishment and uniqueness.
Thanks, Brenda. Arlene, would you like to comment on that?
So I think, as I said at the very beginning, engagement is not within the plan at this point because we don't have the capacity, and the current engagement program is in flight. It's in the midst of implementation. So I think we have to let that see itself through until the corporation is operationalized, and then there is the capacity to address engagement in a more fulsome and better way based on tenant feedback. I think a lot of the concerns that have been expressed today and that I have heard thus far from the deputation, along with other communications that I've received from the field and from seniors, reflect on operational issues around usage and access and engagement. And most of that is sitting in a sphere that I presently am not able to tap into in terms of the capacity we have to work on engagement. But I take your point that as we move forward, we definitely have to keep in mind how can we differentiate from the past experience to the future state and the future experience that we want to have, and how can we better engage tenants along the process to have their voices be heard and acknowledged, and then
and formalized.
Make sure the voices are part of everything that we do.
Thanks, Arlene. Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, thank you so much. Just going to ask Jen St. Louis, I think she's still with us, about the stack. Is Jen still online?
I'm here, yes.
I just wanted you to let us know a little bit, because I don't think people really understand that the Seniors Tenants Advisory Committee is put together by the city in order to assist in developing the corporation. And then I would say to ensure during this long transition that we don't lose sight of tenants while we're doing policy and everything else. Can you just comment on that, please?
I can do that, sure. So the stack was created jointly by TSHC and the city to provide input and feedback on the implementation of the integrated service model specifically. I think the intention is that the Seniors Housing Corporation will develop a way of communicating with tenants and engaging with tenants specifically around the creation of the corporation. I haven't been involved directly with the stack, and I know that Emma is here from Senior Services and Long-Term Care, who has that information. We can also take back any questions. And if you have specific questions about the stack and the terms of reference and how it currently operates, we can get that information for you.
So maybe we should understand what Emma's role is at the city around senior services.
Yeah, so Emma is a management consultant with Senior Services and Long-Term Care, and she has been involved in the city's role as you know, the overseer of the implementation of the integrated service model.
And the stack is an official group set up around the Seniors Corporation.
It was specifically set up for the to provide input into how the integrated service model is being implemented. So I'm not sure that its terms of reference include anything specific to the Seniors Housing Corporation.
Okay, but for the, sorry, it was said the integrated service model is only the it's possible to, hearing stack members have been on a long road, and they are noticing certain things. Mr. Lohman said the role of senior service coordinators, he felt that the stack should have had more input into what that would look like. Mm-hmm. And then the use of space around the ISM, that being turned over to agencies without conversations. Who at Tenants First, Jen, because we have a bit of a vacuum between between now and June. Who at Tenants First, and maybe it's the deputy city manager, has the authority to make sure that it's rolling out in the way it was envisioned? Because it's not just this board's role. There's somebody there at the shareholder that has that responsibility. Would it be you? Would it be Paul? Would it be, I'd assume it'd be the deputy city manager.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the Seniors Housing Corporation, I would say it's the deputy city manager with delegated authority to other staff. So if that's something that the board wants to hear about, that structure, or get updates directly from the city, then we're happy to entertain that and to come back to the board.
But I'm just interested in, and perhaps what I will do, Maureen, is I'm going to refer the issues that I'm just not sure who to refer them to, but I think that because the things we heard from the tenants today, they're at the public board meetings of Toronto Community Housing, we've heard the same deputation. So they're talking, and yet there's nobody who can take hold because it's being transitioned. And I'm seeing the nodding from Carrie and from Brenda. So I do think that the issue of the senior services coordinators, if that wasn't developed in concert with STAC, I'm quite shocked. I will be shocked. So I need to hear if that was developed in that way. And I guess I'm asking, would it be Jen or Emma that could answer that question?
Jen, it's Emma. I can jump in. I can say that the Senior Tenant Advisory Committee has had some engagement on the role of the senior services coordinators, and SSLTC, so Senior Services and Long-Term Care, as I think folks know, we were responsible for developing the accountability framework, which outlines some of these key components of the integrated service model, and SSLTC is responsible for evaluating that model. So that's the work that we do, and in partnership with our colleagues at in Jen's shop and in Toronto Community Housing. So the understanding the comments from the deputant, we did do significant engagement on the development of the accountability framework, and we can get some of that information back to you. And there has been some meetings with the Senior Tenant Advisory Committee on this specific topic, but if there's a need for more deep conversation with our tenant leaders, then I think that's something that we can follow up.
So you're just confirming that the senior services coordinator position, that I'm just going to say the job description essentially was developed in conjunction with senior tenants. Can you confirm that? The actual job description?
I cannot confirm the job description. I can confirm that there was engagement on the component of the roles, some of the roles that the SSC would take. We can connect with our colleagues at Toronto Community Housing to provide more information.
So we don't know. That's important to know. And on the use of space,
If
Sorry,
I may,
I'm sorry, yes.
I'd like to bring us back. I recognize that you're pursuing the points made by the deputants
I
related
am.
to the integrated services model.
That's
But
correct.
our agenda item here is the transition plan and the communication of the transition plan. So I'm wondering,
Sure.
I think we have
Well, let me make my
established.
motion then, Maureen. Thank you. I'd like to refer those issues that were raised by the deputants to the tenants first team. They're the only people that can kind of look at it from both sides. So I apologize. I always like to ask questions that the deputants have asked, because that's their moment and that's why we're here. And if we have deputants that have raised things, I think it's fair if I ask the staff what if their experience and the deputant's experience is the same. So, but I'll appreciate that you don't want to talk. You want me to talk about that? Thank you. So I will just refer that. I'd like to make the motion here to refer the issues that were raised by the deputants, communications issues, that just the engagement side, tenant engagement, communications, the issues raised by the deputants, to the tenants first team that has kind of the authority over tenant issues at both corporations at this moment. So that I think that'll be helpful. Takes it off of here and to report back on how they're managing this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask for a seconder of that
I'll
motion.
second that.
Brenda,
Brenda,
thank
thanks,
you.
yeah.
Just before we take the vote on the motion, Michael, do you have any thing you want to add in terms of the role that you play in relation to this with Tenants First as we consider the motion, or what you'd like to understand?
Yeah, happy to, Maureen. You know, both the issues that have been raised on the implementation of the ISM model and the issues of tenant engagement and how that is evolving under Toronto Community Housing are of great interest to us as a new corporation, because we will inherit these mechanisms and we will want to look at them very closely with respect to, you know, what is the future development of both the ISM model and tenant, the mechanisms by which we engage tenants in our work. And to that end, both the city staff and the Toronto Community Housing team have been very collaborative in informing us as to where those things are at. We've had input, had specific input on the issue of the hubs, which I think was in relation to the deputant's comment about space. And in fact, a kind of stepping back from that work right now in lieu of a consultation plan that's being developed at the moment, so that we can reevaluate that issue, that particular plank of the ISM model, and that will need to go back to the city as well, of course, because it's part of the accountability model currently in place between Toronto Community Housing and the implementation of the ISM model. So all to say, both teams have been very collaborative on the ISM model and with the respect to where the evolution of the tenant engagement work is at Toronto Community Housing. Understanding that we, as a new corporation and not having direct responsibility for these tenants at the moment, our route to direct access to these tenants is through Toronto Community Housing until June 1st, 2022, at an individual level. So asking tenants to participate in focus groups, mailing to tenants with respect to information, all of that has to be done through Toronto Community Housing. But again, I'd like to just emphasize that Toronto Community Housing have been extremely helpful in looking at ways based on what we think our needs will be with respect to tenants, both in getting their input on how we're communicating with tenants around the transition, and to Brenda's comment, making sure we can do that early and often through the process, so that we're constantly going back to tenants and asking how we can improve things, and looking at how we we'll look at this whole evolution of the tenant engagement work as we become the operating company for landlord for these tenants. Toronto Community Housing have been terrifically helpful in making sure that we can have ways to do that, and not, developing a completely parallel system for us, which can't be effective because we don't have direct communication with individual tenants, but that we can have effective ways using current mechanisms to make sure that we're starting to engage tenants on the broad future of the organization, but also having regular touch points with tenants on the work that's going on now. So that's our hope. And from the start of the work that Arlene has done with Toronto Community Housing and the work we're doing with the city, I feel quite confident that we're going to be able to engage tenants in a very strong way in the work ahead.
Thanks, Michael. Is there any further discussion of Jim?
I just wanted to say that in the beginning, I was a member of STAC and left because of the issues that were raised. And when this opportunity to join the board came along, I applied because I wanted the voices of tenants to be heard and not just assume what's good for tenants, but to make sure, as my elder Ernie Benedict once said to me, the doing unto others as you would have them do unto you is a road that leads to hell. You need to ask people how they want to be done unto. And this is, for me, this is the most important issue we're facing.
Yeah.
Is tenant engagement.
Yeah.
Thanks very
Can
much.
I just, that was great. And Michael, thank you so much for that. I know that you're working very hard with JAG and others. The kind of role of Tenants First it's all about tenant engagement. So I think that doesn't supplant any of the work that's ongoing between the two corporations, but it is kind of a direction that it's really the only one that we have as a board to say, these issues are still out there. Can you please look into it and get back to us around the engagement issues that have been raised? The kind of what I heard say top-down communications rather than I don't think that this in any way takes away from the work that's being done. It just again puts tenants first into the critical role they have to play, as well as our deputy city manager, because he does oversee that work. So I think it's a helpful thing, and I think Brenda seconded that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Is there any further discussion of Councillor Fletcher's motion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
Were there
Okay,
any
thank
opposed,
you.
Maureen? Nobody's opposed.
No.
Great.
No.
Thank you so much.
No, I think it's quite clear, both from the comments from directors and the comments from Michael. I think we are clearly aligned with the tenant expectations that things be different. We are doing our best to signal that within the existing structures that we have to work within between now and June. And I think both the input from the tenants and the input from board members has been very helpful. So thank you for that. And Arlene, thank you for your presentation. And I know you'll take forward what you've heard today. Thank you.
Thank you so
I'm going to
much.
move us on.
Madam Chair, may I just ask one quick question about the IS integrated service model? I'm not clear. Did someone say that that's been on pause until?
Yes, we were advised, we had a discussion about that, I believe, at our August board meeting.
Yeah.
That Michael, do you want to just quickly recap that, and then we have to move on?
Yes, Brenda, it was just one component of the ISM model, which was the implementation of the hubs.
That's
the piece that's going for further consultation.
The hub model. And then this concern about leasing of space to agencies, is that also on pause?
I think that is connected with that
I hope
issue
so.
with the hub, because there was a plan to partner with other agencies to use that common space as part of the hub model. I believe that was what the deputant was speaking.
Okay, so similar to Councillor Fletcher's comment, who's in charge of the ISM? Like, you know, is it
City.
Tenants First or the city?
Yes.
The city working
Michael?
with Toronto Community Housing.
Okay, because I think in addition to tenant engagement, I can see a flashpoint is going to be this ISM and how it's implemented. If I could just ask, it's not a motion, but that at some point we put some attention to that issue before the time runs out, because we don't want to have implemented something that may not be suitable for our needs. And seeing as the loss of community space has been a big issue and worry, it seems at some point we'll have to devote some energy and time to that issue as a developing corporation. That's all. Thank you.
And can I just add on that what leases say about access to space? I mean, all the tenants have leases, and I'm not sure what's in their lease about their access to common space. I don't think that was ever looked at, Michael. So just FYI on that.
It was an issue I raised, Councillor
Thank
Fletcher.
you. Good. Thanks so much.
In the context of the discussion, to pause that.
Yes. Great.
And we will be having a focused discussion of the integrated services model going forward based on the work that is being done. So thank you, Arlene, and we look forward to the engagement in the communication. So thank you very much. We're now going to turn to the draft executive leadership team, item 16. Helena, can you speak to this?
Absolutely. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'm just going to take a few minutes actually to speak about a draft executive leadership team structure that is before you for review and for feedback. Our intent is to come back with a formal resolution once we've received feedback from the board. Of course, in setting up an interim structure, we would see that it would be further refined, excuse me, once the CEO is in place. But it's definitely useful for us as a corporation to have an understanding of what our structure is going to be as part of the planning of the transition. And so what you have before you is a draft organizational chart, if you will, as attachment 1 that lays out the reporting of the president and CEO to the board of directors. And there are 6 positions that are being recommended. And I think just based on the discussions today, hearing about how important a chief operating officer will be, as well as a VP of Tenant Health and Wellness, which is going to be really a distinguishing feature and really important for seniors to bring that aspect forward. And then a VP of Tenant Engagement, Communications and Strategic Planning, again, based on what we're hearing today and continue to hear, the upfront and foremost issue around ensuring that there is continuous engagement, and definitely having someone on the leadership that is focused on that is key. And then we have the corporate roles, if you will, that help an organization run, such as HR, the CFO, and general counsel and corporate secretary. We've already received feedback on the structure itself with regards to internal audit, and that internal audit report directly to the board and not through the CFO. So that's the feedback that we've received by a board member as well. And then obviously having an interim executive compensation salary ranges will be important as well for these roles. and creating the job descriptions as well. And so that'll be sort of some of the next steps once we have a confirmed structure. And so, Madam Chair, really looking forward to feedback from the board.
Thanks very much, Helena. Are there questions for Helena based on, yes, Carrie?
Thank you. Thanks, Helena. Can you just expand a little on the VP Tenant Health and Wellness and just the scope of that position as you see it?
Absolutely, happy to do that. This is really the role that will be looking into the wellness programming for seniors, making the connections to community agencies. We talked earlier about the SSLTC, so Senior Services Long-Term Care, and with Ontario Health. So really having a senior focus and commitment as to work very closely with operations in developing those programs and bringing them to the seniors.
Maybe if I could also make a comment here, Carrie, if it's helpful. This particular leadership role, I think, will be one of the really distinguishing features for us as a new corporation around having specific focus on seniors. I think this is a role that is going to be critical in providing stronger links for seniors to the supports they need to age in place, in health, and with dignity. So for me, this will be one of the distinguishing features of why we're creating a new corporation with a focus on seniors. And I think the role, this person, I think, will have a very strong role in looking at the integrated service model in concert with the chief operating officer, who's going to have the role of operations and, the staff in the buildings. But I think this leadership role is going to have a key input into, how that program around supports for seniors, the integrated service model and links to health supports is going to be developed.
Okay, you're right, it is a distinguishing feature. Good. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, just remind me, Michael, that the maintenance of the buildings, minor capital, we'll call it, that's what we call it, minor capital, the fixing of this and that, minor issues, is all going to be covered under the senior corporation, correct? So just facilities maintenance.
The staff who are the staff. No. Staff. Sorry, Councillor Fletcher, I didn't allow you to finish.
Yeah, and that the major capital, elevators, let's say, that's a major capital, millions and millions. Where does that sit? I think that sits under the state of good repair. And on our leases, does that not stay over with Toronto Community Housing? Can you just be clear on that for us one more time? Yeah. We're still on our learning curve here. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Yes, as under the direction of the city, and for the reasons I think someone stated earlier, it might have been you, Councillor Fletcher, around where this corporation sits. Toronto Community Housing will retain ownership of the buildings, and as part of that, they will retain responsibility for the major capital for the buildings, and all of that is on a schedule, and as we know, the city have committed, and that's, I think, working well in terms of a general upgrade of all of the buildings over an extensive period, and we will be part of that with the buildings that we will lease from Toronto Community Housing. But and our interest in that lease and that lease agreement will be, of course, to maintain our kind of priority level for our buildings in that general scheme of major capital upgrades. So that would be things like, the roof needs repairing or major boiler in the building needs replacing. All of that will be under the major capital. With respect to the minor repairs, This is an issue that we will be considering with the help of MNP, who are the consultants that the city has retained really on our behalf with the city and the two corporations to look at shared services. All of the staff we know in those buildings will be coming over. They'll become staff of Toronto Seniors Housing. But how we look at how minor repairs and upkeep is managed, that's going to be subject of the shared services review, and of course we'll be having strong input into that in terms of what we feel, and all of this will come back to the board, and we're going to get tenant input on this as well as to what's the best way to start the new corporation with respect to responsibility for those services.
Yeah, so that the operations, just looking at the budget though, because I think that's going to drive who's doing what on your executive team. The budget for minor will be undertaken, minor capital. It'll be in our budget, and the staff will be directed to fix this and fix that and get the faucet done and fix the wall by staff of Toronto Seniors Corporation.
So that may be the case.
We're not sure yet. Okay.
Oh, there may also be outside contracts.
No, but the person who oversees it will be overseen from our side of the fence.
Yes, generally, but
and driven.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
But correct. All of it will be driven from our side of the fence. But subject to the work in the shared services review, we will look at any outside contracts that are in place if they're not being delivered currently by the staff in those buildings, and how we want to best manage those continuing into the future with Toronto Community Housing. So we, as part of the shared services, we will look at all of that and determine, other than the work that's done directly by the staff in the buildings, which of course we will manage because they'll be our staff. If there are outside contracts in place, we will look at those with Toronto Community Housing in the city and look at what's the best way of proceeding, whether we take on those contracts, whether we continue to rely on Toronto Community Housing to manage those on our behalf. And of course, all of that would be under agreement. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of that. I think will be very helpful consultants' work on what's the best way of proceeding. And I would say that however we proceed on June 1st, it's not necessarily how we're going to be proceeding, 3 years down the road. So there may be things that we decide as of June 1st, we're going to carry on and then perhaps review a year later or whatever the appropriate time period is. If we think in the long run, it makes sense for us to really take over responsibility for those contracts.
Okay, so it's the minor and major that I'm really thinking about. But I don't know if you've had a chance, because I think I would support the proposal in principle, and I'd be prepared to support that in that way. But I think some of the details around the operations focus versus the wellness focus, and whether or not there's a COO for 83 buildings or that's divided up through VPs in different ways, is a conversation that we should have. And I think it's a conversation that would be great for you to have with the deputy city manager who's on the call, because there's just a whole number of functions that are being reviewed. So it's a pretty small corporation. So we want to make sure all of those positions are completely aligned to the functions that we are putting a priority on. And I don't want to say no, but I would say I would just approve this in principle, and then the board direct you to have that conversation with Paul Johnson, just to make sure that we have it aligned properly. So I don't want to agree to everything completely. I would agree in principle with that coming back after that conversation, please.
Yeah, there was no intent for approval today. This is an opportunity for feedback and discussion. So your
Oh,
comments
okay.
are extremely
Good.
valuable,
Good.
Councillor Fletcher. We're gonna
That's my
socialize
feedback.
this, and it'll be transparent. This is all in public session
Yes,
as well.
I
So,
guess so. But that's my
I,
motion.
yeah, we don't. I don't think we require a motion at this point, Councillor Fletcher, because
okay.
we're going to go through that discussion. It's just for information.
Yeah, I don't want socialize to take the place of a direct discussion with the deputy city manager. So if I need to move that motion, I will move that motion directly. If that's an undertaking by you, then I can accept that. It's not socializing it. It's very clear in looking at the anyway, because we're in this vacuum time. So we can't make any mistakes here. There's no way to fix anything. So we need as much assistance as possible, given that we have two corporations, and that would be it. So if you're giving me that undertaking, Michael, I'm fine with that.
Yep.
Yes.
But if you feel you need to motion, I'm happy to.
No, if you have the undertaking, that's fine. But I'm not talking about getting everybody's opinion. I'm very clear on the opinion that I think the board would like to have, and certainly appreciate all the thinking that goes into this. And I think the role of the board is to make sure that all of your great thinking is going to get us to the finish line in the best way. And thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Fletcher. Brenda?
Just a question. Is there an explanation as to why we call these positions VP? I'm always worried about mission and mandate creep. You know, what in other organizations would be called manager or executive manager now becomes VP here, and that has consequences for compensation. So is there an explanation why these positions are titled VP? Is it something that's consistent with other practices, with city agencies? I just want to get an idea because, you know, words mean everything and they have financial consequences attached to them.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, these are working titles. They're not final as of yet. At the end of the day, all positions will be evaluated, and then they will be benchmarked with other public sector comparators as well, and provided based on scope and duties being performed, and control. So these are working titles. They are similar to other corporations' leadership teams, and that's why we went with these at the current time.
Okay. Okay. And one last thing, and supporting Councillor Fletcher and their concern about minor and major capital. I'm glad you raised those points because I'm concerned about what roles our staff will do. Will they be doing some of the repairs, or are we going to be following on this contractor, which seems to be the source of a lot of complaints? And I'm glad you raised it.
I think, Linda, you had a...
Yeah, thanks for it. I think it's a good, beginning. I also share some of Brenda's comments in terms of just make sure we scale it to the size that this organization is. We tend to actually go with the city kind of, big corporation. And I think other organizations that actually are housing organizations don't sometimes have this, the hierarchy that comes with actually the compensation that goes with more city positions. The other thought in terms of I worry a little bit that the COO and the tenant wellness and the tenant and the engagement are going to get siloed. And what we're hearing from our tenants is wellness actually is more than just actually connection with health organizations. To me, that a lot of what you actually have in that category is actually integrated service delivery and stakeholder relations, because you don't actually manage those people that are listed, the LIN and all of those. So, and I have seen in other organizations close to this that you actually get people working in a very separate zone. So if there was a way, to me, all of the mandate is actually tenant health and wellness, and it's a broad condition. Believe me, bed bugs and safety in the hallways and other things that you wouldn't actually think about kind of health particularly, but more the broader determinants of health are actually things that actually other, are really critical. So maybe just actually nuancing that and even thinking about the things that actually would cover like the COO, that tenant and those 2 tenant VPs would be interesting to me. And don't break out health and wellness with engagement. A lot of the work is community engagement and not just like individual. So just my early thoughts. But maybe the mission is health and wellness, broadly, and we have a definition, and that's actually everybody's mandate.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you.
I just had my hand up again, Maureen. Sorry, because this
sorry.
is such an important conversation. And Linda, I'm going to give you 5 stars for that. It's really insightful that it's not necessarily the Lynn, it's how many times you've been sprayed for bed bugs. Is it 10? What happened? What happened to the tenant? What's gone wrong? Carrie's nodding because you've heard these stories. And safety in the halls and lighting and those kinds of things where you're living a safe and secure life in a good place. I think being a great senior landlord, that's our goal, and all that goes with it in that sense of the mission. And we've had that conversation a couple of times. Just taking one thing about the agency versus the corporation, I think we all know, but I'll just reiterate that it's a corporation because TCHC is a corporation, and TCHC has all of these as a corporation for the city. There's all the lands are tied up, all the buildings are tied up. So even though there was a desire to have this as a seniors agency, more like a Wood Green or other organizations, nonprofits, it was impossible. So I don't want us to get hung up, as you said, Linda, on being called a corporation, and therefore we have to meet a certain template, that we should design this as the best housing provider for seniors, taking all those things into account, which might not, and I think we kind of are falling into it's a corp, so here's all the things corporations have. So that's really helpful discussion today as far as who we want to be.
Well, thank you all. I think the intent of this discussion at this time has been more than realized, both by the questions that have been raised and also the reinforcement of the core of the tenants in the structuring of the corporation. So I think, as indicated at the outset by Helena, this is intended to be the feedback that will enable her to take this the next step. Michael has undertaken to have a conversation with Paul Johnson. So this, I think, has been, I hope, to both Helena and Michael, very useful input to enable you to both take all of this into consideration and come back to us at a future date with more specifics that reflects this input. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next item is number 17, the shared services review update, and Mary Tate is going to speak to us about how that's unfolding. You're on mute, Mary.
Sorry, this is an information item just to bring you up to date on the shared services project, and we will be back in November and December with much more detailed information. The project is really just starting, but I did want to give you a very quick overview of what the shared services project is going to do. Broadly speaking, there are a number of ways that services can be provided, but very broadly speaking, there's direct service provision, and we've just been talking about some of those things. There's service that's provided through a third party, and then something that would be called shared services. And in this case, a shared service would likely be something that's shared with Toronto Community Housing Corporation. So the way the project will unfold is to, first of all, do a very broad inventory of potential services so that we're sure we're looking at kind of everything that has to be done and not prejudging exactly how those things will be done, but to do a fairly systematic review of the best way to provide the services. Again, broadly speaking, when we're looking at shared services, the things that are most amenable to being a shared service are the things that are farthest away from your frontline tenants. They're the back office items, such as paying the bills or making sure that payroll is done correctly and those kinds of things. And on the other hand, broadly speaking, the things that are closest to the tenants in this case are the things that you would want to deliver directly as a corporation. So that's a kind of general framework. But of course, at the end of the day, the devil is in the details, and many of these things have several components to them. So you might have a tenant-facing service that is largely done directly, but the back office component of that might be shared. So there's quite a lot of work to be done to do the inventory, look at the ones that are most amenable to shared service, and then try to figure out exactly how those things would be done. And then the things that are not really appropriate for a shared service, that would come back to the corporation, to Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, to have a discussion about how exactly we are going to deliver those services. So it's a big project, and I did note in the report that, and as Michael just said, that some of these things you might make an interim decision on how you want to do them in June, with an understanding that you might look at it differently after you're up and running. So as I said, the project is just getting started. The first meeting with the consultant, which is MMP, was on Thursday, October 14th. And we will be moving forward tomorrow with a working group to start looking at the inventory and working through the details of what might be shared, and come back to you in November and December with an update, probably some initial thoughts in November, with hopefully a preliminary list of the things that are most obviously the things that would be part of a shared service, so we can start working on the details, and a final report of the kind of whole inventory, the big picture, in February. So happy to answer any questions about
Thanks
this.
very much, Mary. Are there any questions for Mary? No? Okay. I'll let you go on then, Mary, to your transition project plan reporting.
Okay.
Item 18.
All right. So this is also just an information update to let you know.
One sec, Mary. Just a sec. Jim, did you have a?
I have to leave at this time
Yes,
to
I know.
make it to work on time. So I'm sorry, but I will check the minutes when they're given. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Hope you all have a good day.
Bye, Jim.
Thank you. Okay, Mary?
So on the project plan, you did receive some material last night, which I apologize, unfortunately, was left out of your package. But I just wanted to give you a quick overview of where we're at with developing a project plan. The first thing that has been done and is complete is to try to create an understanding of all the work that has to be done as part of the transition project. And it's been discussed with the team here and at TSHC and the city, and Maureen as board chair. And I think we were able to put together a pretty comprehensive understanding of everything that we need to achieve. Now, of course, things pop up, but in order to do a good plan, you really need to have that big picture. And then the next thing we did was what is determining the project plan structure, so that we are clear on who has responsibilities for the major components of the plan, and what are the key activities in each of the buckets of work. So that is also complete. And then from there, we move along to setting key dates, milestones, and dependencies And that is in progress and coming along quite well. And then finally, once you have a full project plan, you create the process for monitoring against that plan to make sure that you're actually going to get to the end on the date that we're aiming for. So that's also in progress. So that's just generally what we've been going through. I provided a very high Gantt chart to show the buckets of activity, governance, shared services, finance, administration, HR and labor relations, communications and tenant relations, and what's called transition priorities and planning. And so under those things, we have activities that address each of those issues. A project plan is only useful if you are able to use it to report your status and if you're getting where you need to go. And so I provided a template of what I am proposing to bring to the board on a monthly basis, which basically lets you know whether we're red, green, or red, yellow, or green, hopefully green. But any issues that are arising in the implementation of the project plan will be included there, as well as a section on upcoming activities so that you know what we're doing in the following period. And then finally, we provided a first status report as of October 15th, looking at generally the status by work area, but since we have reports from in most of the work areas, I didn't detail the status there, and then following up with the work that is planned to be done in the next month. So again, the purpose of this is just to give you an overview of where we're going with the project plan, and I hope to give you some assurance that that we have tried to be as comprehensive to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks.
Thanks very much, Mary. Any questions for Mary? No? Okay, well, thank you. And just to acknowledge through each of the presentations we've received from the members of the team, I'm sure the board will agree with me that we are in good hands in terms of the scope of what is being considered, the collaboration with which it's being considered, and the leadership which is being taken in a very steep curve to get us to where we need to be for June 1st, 2022. So thank you to all of you, and we really will look forward to the evolution of these plans in the months ahead. So thank you all. That takes us to our final item 19, which is the meeting dates for 2022, which we wanted to get into your calendars at this point. We have a resolution. As you can see, we will be scheduled to meet monthly until from January through June. It may require additional meetings subject to how things unfold in the transition, but these are scheduled for now, and hopefully these will be sufficient, but we'll see as we move forward. So we have a resolution to approve these 8 meetings as scheduled. Could I have a motion to adopt the resolution? Sorry, who was that?
Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie. Seconder?
Seconded by Warren.
Thanks, Warren. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, that concludes our agenda. Just before we adjourn, I would like to, on behalf of the board, congratulate Linda. She had to leave us for a few minutes during the meeting because her family health team at St. Mike's has been awarded what's called the Bright Lights Award for their COVID response to the most vulnerable in the Downtown East that was given by the Association of Family Health Teams at their conference this morning. So Linda, congratulations to you and your team, and obviously very well done.
We're so glad to
Thank
have
you
a
very
star
much.
with us.
And by the way, Toronto Community Housing, we're partners in all of that work. So right back at you. And thank you for understanding that I had to pop off.
Okay, well, thank you. So thank you all for your time today. Could I have a motion to adjourn? Who would like to move adjournment? Linda, thank you. Second. Hello, Warren? Will you second that?
Yeah.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And thank you so much for all of your time today, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.